The trendy coffee shop was quiet until a woman's outrage over my father's red hat turned violent, forcing him to reveal a truth about himself that silenced the entire room. The smell of roasted coffee beans and steamed milk usually calmed me, but that day it just felt like a cheap veneer over the tension simmering in the air. We were at the Daily Grind, one of those hyper-trendy downtown coffee shops with exposed brick, reclaimed wood tables, and baristas who looked more like indie band members than people who served coffee. It was my dad's choice. He'd just officially retired a week prior, and he said he wanted to see what all the fuss was about with these newfangled places. I think he was just trying to connect, to step into my world for a bit, and I loved him for it. My father, David, is a man carved from a different era. He's 65, with salt and pepper hair cut in a neat military style, and calm blue eyes that have seen more than most people could ever imagine. He has a quiet strength, a presence that commands respect without ever demanding it. And on that particular Tuesday, he was wearing a bright red "Make America Great Again" hat. It wasn't a political statement, not really. Not in the way this coffee shop crowd would interpret it. My uncle had given it to him as a gag gift, and my dad, a man who sees function over form, had started wearing it when he did yard work. He'd been pulling weeds that morning. We decided to get coffee on a whim, and he'd simply forgotten to take it off. To him, it was just a hat, a sun shield. To the clientele of the Daily Grind, it was a declaration of war. We hadn't even gotten our lattes before I felt the first glare. A woman at a nearby table, probably in her late 40s, with expensive yoga pants and a designer water bottle, looked over at my dad. Her face, which had been a mask of serene contentment as she scrolled through her phone, soured as if she'd just sipped curdled milk. Her eyes narrowed on the red hat, and her lips curled into a sneer of pure, unadulterated disgust. I nudged my dad, but he was busy studying the ridiculously complicated menu, trying to figure out the difference between a flat white and a cortado. He was oblivious. I wished I was. The barista called his name, David, and my dad walked up to the counter to get our drinks. As he passed the woman's table, she muttered something just loud enough for me to hear over the gentle hum of the espresso machine. Fascist pig! A hot spike of anger shot through my chest. I wanted to stand up, to walk over and ask her what her problem was, but I knew my dad. He hated confrontation. He'd spent his entire life dealing with conflict on a global scale. The last thing he wanted was a petty squabble in a coffee shop over a stupid hat. So I bit my tongue, forcing a smile as he set my oat milk latte down in front of me. They even put a little leaf on it, he said, genuinely impressed. Fancy. We talked for a few minutes about his retirement plans. He was going to finally build that workshop he'd always wanted, maybe take up fishing again. It was a perfect, peaceful father-son moment. And then it was shattered. The woman from the other table was standing over us. She had her phone in one hand, not recording, but holding it like a weapon. Her face was flushed, her eyes blazing with a self-righteous fire. "I can't believe you have the audacity," she began, her voice dripping with venom, "to wear that symbol of hatred in here, in this establishment." My dad looked up from his coffee, his expression one of mild confusion. "Ma'am, don't ma'am me," she snapped. "People like you are destroying this country. You and your racist, misogynistic cult." I started to stand up. "Hey, listen, lady." My dad put a hand on my arm, a gentle but firm pressure that told me to stay put. He looked directly at the woman, his calm blue eyes meeting her furious ones. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm just trying to have a cup of coffee with my son. This hat is just a hat. It means nothing." His calmness seemed to enrage her further. It was like she wanted a fight, and his refusal to engage was a personal insult. "It means everything," she shrieked, causing several other patrons to turn and stare. "It means you stand for bigotry. It means you're a monster." My dad sighed softly, a sound of pure weariness. He started to speak again, to try and de-escalate, to be the bigger person. But he never got the chance. The woman leaned forward, her face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. And then she did it. She gathered saliva in her mouth and spat. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the glob of spit, white and viscous, sail through the air in a perfect, horrifying arc. It landed squarely on the brim of the red hat, a disgusting, glistening smear right above my father's eyes. A single drop trickled down, stopping just short of his eyebrow. The entire coffee shop fell silent. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of a leaky faucet behind the counter. My blood ran cold, then boiling hot. I shot out of my chair, my fists clenched so tightly my knuckles were white. "You have no idea," I seethed, my voice a low growl. "Who you just did that to?" The woman didn't flinch. If anything, she looked proud. She smirked, a cruel, triumphant twist of her lips. "Oh, I know exactly who he is," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "He's a hateful old man who supports a tyrant. He deserves far worse." But it was my dad's reaction that froze everyone in place. He didn't wipe away the spit. He didn't yell. He didn't even look angry. He slowly, deliberately, reached up and put a hand on my chest, pushing me gently back. Then, with a fluid precision that seemed out of place in the trendy cafe, he took off the hat. He held it in his hand, looking down at the spittle marring the red fabric. He was completely still for a long moment. When he finally lifted his head to look at the woman, his calm, gentle eyes had transformed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years. It was a look of cold, hard, unyielding authority. It was the look of a man who had made life or death decisions in the blink of an eye. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a razor. It carried a weight that made the air feel heavy, a tone that had commanded thousands of soldiers without ever needing to be raised. "Ma'am," he said, his eyes locked on hers, "you've just made a grave miscalculation." The woman let out a short, ugly laugh. "A grave miscalculation? Are you serious?" she scoffed, crossing her arms and jutting out a hip. "What are you going to do, Gramps? Call your buddies down at the bingo hall? Maybe you can all get together and complain about snowflakes while you assault decent people with your hateful symbols." She gestured around the room, trying to rally the other patrons to her side. "This is what they do. They intimidate. They threaten. When all I did was stand up for what's right." A few people nodded along, caught up in her righteous performance. Most, however, just looked deeply uncomfortable, staring into their coffee cups as if they held the secrets to the universe. My father didn't even glance at them. His focus was entirely on her. He held the defiled hat in one hand and, with the other, slowly pulled his wallet from his back pocket. For a moment I thought he was going to offer her money, a bizarre attempt to make this go away. But he didn't open it. He just held the worn leather in his hand, a simple anchor in the swirling chaos. He turned his gaze from her and scanned the room until his eyes landed on the manager, a 20-something with a nervous twitch and a top knot, who was trying to look busy wiping down an already pristine counter. "Young man," my dad said, his voice still quiet but now carrying an undeniable note of command. The manager froze, his eyes wide. My dad walked over to the counter, placing the hat gently beside the register. The manager flinched as if the red fabric might burn him. "I need you to call the police," my dad stated. It wasn't a request. It was an order. "Tell the dispatcher that there has been an assault on a federal officer. Tell them to send a unit from the nearest military police detachment as well." The word assault sent a fresh wave of derisive laughter from the woman. "Oh my God, you're completely delusional. An assault. The police are going to laugh you out of the city." She turned to the manager. "You're not actually going to call them, are you? He's the one causing trouble." The manager looked torn, his gaze flickering between my father's stony face and the woman's furious one. He was just a kid, caught in a battle far beyond his pay grade. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, utterly lost. "Do it," my dad said, his voice dropping half an octave. "Now." It was that simple command that seemed to break the spell. The manager fumbled for the phone behind the counter, his hands shaking. The woman's face began to change. Her smug certainty was starting to crack, replaced by a flicker of confusion. A federal officer? Military police? It didn't make sense. This was just some angry old Republican in a coffee shop. That's all he was supposed to be. As the manager stammered into the phone, a new voice cut through the tension. "Sir?" We all turned. A young man who couldn't have been more than 22 was standing by his table in the corner. He had been hunched over a laptop with big headphones on, but now they were around his neck. He was tall and lean, with a fresh haircut that was just a little too short to be fashionable. He was looking at my dad, but not like everyone else. There was no judgment, no curiosity, just a dawning, incredulous recognition. My dad turned to face him, his posture still relaxed, but his eyes sharp and appraising. The young man took a hesitant step forward, then another. He looked from my father's face to the spit-covered hat on the counter, and a flash of anger crossed his features before being quickly suppressed. "Excuse me, sir," he said again, his voice clearer now, more certain. He stood up straight, his shoulders squaring instinctively. It was a subtle shift, but it changed him completely. He was no longer a college kid studying for finals. He was something else entirely. "Pardon me for asking, but you look an awful lot like my commanding officers." "Commanding officer." The woman rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go. The whole pretend soldier brigade is coming out of the woodwork." The young man ignored her completely. His eyes were locked on my dad. "From the 1st Marine Division. You were our CO during the Helmand Province offensive, weren't you?" My dad gave the slightest of nods. "I was in the region, son." A wave of emotion washed over the young man's face, awe, respect, and something akin to reverence. It was the look of a follower finding their leader in the most unexpected of places. He took another step forward, his back ramrod straight, his chin up. His heels clicked together on the polished concrete floor with a sound that was shockingly loud in the quiet room. He stood at perfect rigid attention. "General David Miller?" The young man's voice rang out, clear and strong, filled with a certainty that silenced every other thought in the room. "Lance Corporal Evans, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. It is an honor, sir." The woman's sneer froze on her face. Her jaw went slack. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a pasty, sickly white. The word hung in the air, echoing off the exposed brick and reclaimed wood. "General." It wasn't just a word. It was a detonation, and in the deafening silence that followed, I could see the smoking crater where her entire self-righteous world used to be. The word "general" didn't just hang in the air. It detonated. The resulting silence was more profound than any noise. Every whisper, every clink of a spoon, every hum of the espresso machine had vanished, sucked into the vacuum left by that single title. The woman's face was a collage of disbelief and dawning horror. The smugness, the righteous fury. It all melted away, leaving behind the weak, sagging features of someone who had just realized they'd jumped into a shark tank, thinking it was a petting zoo. My father turned his attention to the young Marine. I saw the man I called Dad recede, and General Miller step forward. It was a subtle shift in his posture, a hardening of his jawline, but it was as definitive as a flag being raised. "At ease, Corporal," he said, his voice calm and even. "Good to see you're still looking sharp." Lance Corporal Evans relaxed, but only fractionally. He was still a coiled spring of military discipline. "You too, sir," he replied, his eyes darting to the woman with a look of pure contempt. "Sorry you have to deal with this situation." "Situation," my dad repeated, turning his cool gaze back to the woman. She flinched, physically recoiling as if his eyes were hot coals. She finally found her voice, though it was a thin, reedy version of its former shriek. "General? You're not a general. You're lying. This is a trick." She looked desperately at the barista, then at the other customers. "He's lying. They're all in on it together, can't you see?" But no one was looking at her anymore. They were all looking at my father, re-evaluating everything they had assumed in the last 10 minutes. They saw the quiet man who had been patiently studying the menu, the retiree in the ridiculous red hat, and they tried to square that image with the one standing before them now, a figure of immense understated authority. My dad ignored her babbling. He looked at the manager, who was still holding the phone to his ear, his knuckles white. "Is help on the way?" my dad asked. The manager nodded jerkily. They said 10 minutes. "Good," my dad said. He then took out his wallet again. This time he flipped it open. He didn't flash it around, but held it out for the manager to see. From where I stood, I could see the unmistakable blue and gold of a Department of Defense ID card, his photo stark and serious under the lamination, his rank printed in clear, bold letters. My name is David Miller. I'm a retired 4-star general of the United States Marine Corps. That woman, he said, nodding toward his accuser without looking at her, has committed assault. When the police arrive, I will be pressing charges. The woman gasped, a sound like air leaking from a punctured tire. Pressing charges? For what? Spitting? You can't be serious. It's not a crime. Assault is defined as an intentional act that creates an apprehension of imminent harmful or offensive contact, my dad recited, his tone flat and academic, like he was reading from a textbook. Spitting on someone is a textbook example of battery, which falls under the umbrella of assault. Furthermore, given my former status, doing so could potentially be interpreted as an assault on a federal officer, which carries a significantly higher penalty. We can let the district attorney sort that out. Every word was a nail in her coffin. She stared at him, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. The reality of her situation was finally, truly, sinking in. She hadn't just accosted some random old man. She had assaulted a highly decorated, incredibly powerful individual in a room full of witnesses with a United States Marine standing guard. The self-righteous warrior for social justice had become a common criminal in the span of 5 minutes. The distant wail of a siren began to cut through the city noise. It grew steadily louder, a harbinger of the consequences that were now racing toward her. The woman's eyes widened in panic. Her bravado was gone, replaced by a raw, primal fear. "Look, I was just upset," she stammered, taking a half-step back. "That hat, it's very triggering. I got carried away. I'm sorry, okay? I apologize." My dad didn't even blink. "Your apology is noted," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "It will be included in my statement to the police." The siren was loud now, screaming just down the street. 2 police cruisers, lights flashing, pulled up to the curb outside the coffee shop's large picture window. The entire cafe turned to watch as 2 uniformed officers got out of the first car. They were city cops, a man and a woman, both looking like they were in the middle of a long and tedious shift. They pushed through the door, a little bell chiming comically above their heads. The male officer, a burly man with a thick mustache and a weary expression, put his hands on his hips and surveyed the bizarre tableau. He saw the terrified manager behind the counter, the stunned patrons, the young man standing at attention like a statue, the sputtering, panicked woman, and my father, standing calm and composed amidst the chaos. His eyes finally landed on the spit-covered MAGA hat still sitting on the counter. He sighed, a deep, world-weary sound. "All right," he said, his voice a low grumble of impatience. He looked directly at the woman who was closest to the door and visibly the most agitated person in the room. "Dispatch said something about an assault? Ma'am, can you tell me what's going on here?" The woman saw her chance. The officer had addressed her first, a lifeline in a sea of her own making. Her fear morphed back into a desperate, theatrical indignation. She pointed a trembling finger at my father. "Officer, thank God you're here. This man threatened me. He and his accomplice," she said, gesturing vaguely toward Lance Corporal Evans. "They ganged up on me. I felt unsafe. I was defending myself." The officer with the mustache exchanged a tired look with his partner. This was clearly not the call he'd hoped for to break up the monotony of his afternoon. "Defending yourself from what, ma'am?" he asked, pulling out a small notepad. "From his hatred," she exclaimed, her voice rising again. "He came in here wearing that hat. It's a symbol of violence and bigotry. It's a direct threat to people like me. He was intimidating everyone in the coffee shop. I asked him to leave, and he refused. He became aggressive. I couldn't stay silent any longer. "That is a complete and utter lie," I said, stepping forward. "She came to our table, screamed at him, and then she spat on him." The officer held up a hand to silence me. "One at a time," he said, his gaze still fixed on the woman. "So you're saying he was the aggressor?" "Yes, absolutely," she insisted, sensing she might be gaining ground. "He got right in my face. I was terrified. I may have reacted. But it was in self-defense. He's a dangerous man." It was at that moment that the door chimed again. 2 more figures entered, but these were not city cops. They were dressed in the crisp, imposing uniforms of the military police. One was a tall, stern-faced captain. The other a sergeant who looked like he was carved from granite. The air in the coffee shop instantly became even heavier. The city cops straightened up, their demeanor shifting from bored to alert. The MP's eyes scanned the room, their movements economical and precise, before landing on my father. The MP captain took a step forward, his polished boots clicking on the floor. "General Miller?" he asked, his voice a respectful baritone. "It's Captain Hayes, Fort Hamilton Provost Marshal's office. We received a dispatch about an incident." My father nodded. "Captain, thank you for the prompt response." The mustached city cop's head swiveled from the MP captain back to my dad. His eyebrows shot up his forehead. He looked at the retired man in civilian clothes, then at the spit-covered hat, then at the 2 stone-faced military police officers who had just referred to him as General. The gears were turning, and the conclusion they were reaching was one he clearly didn't like. "Wait a minute," he said, turning back to the woman. "Did you know who this man was when you reacted?" "Of course not," she sputtered. "He's just some random old man. How was I supposed to know he had a private army?" "He doesn't have a private army, ma'am," Captain Hayes cut in, his voice cold as ice. "He's a retired 4-star general of the United States Marine Corps, and you are standing in a city that is home to one of the largest concentrations of active and retired military personnel in the country. You spat on a living legend." The woman's face, which I thought couldn't get any paler, somehow managed it. Her fabricated story was crumbling around her. She had built her defense on the image of a weak, hateful old man, a caricature she had created in her mind. But the reality standing before her was a man who commanded more respect in his retirement than she had ever known in her life. The city cop pinched the bridge of his nose and sighed again. "Ma'am, did you or did you not spit on this gentleman?" he asked, his patience clearly evaporated. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, for an ally, for any version of events that didn't end with her in handcuffs. She looked at me, at the barista, at the other customers. She saw nothing but condemnation and disgust in their eyes now. She had gone too far, and there was no way back. It wasn't like that," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't understand." "I think we're beginning to," the female officer said, stepping forward. She had been quiet until now, just observing. "Sir," she said to my dad, "would you like to press charges for assault and battery?" Before my dad could answer, Captain Hayes spoke again. "With all due respect, officers, this may now be a federal matter. Assaulting a military officer, even a retired one, can fall under federal jurisdiction, depending on the circumstances. We'll be taking the lead on this investigation." The city cop looked relieved. "Be my guest," he muttered. The female officer unhooked the handcuffs from her belt. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back." The click of the metal cuffs locking around the woman's wrists was the final, definitive sound. Her fight was over. All the fire, all the righteous anger, all the political fervor was gone. She was just a woman in expensive yoga pants, crying silently as she was being arrested in a trendy coffee shop. As the officers led her out the door, she looked back at my father one last time, her eyes pleading. "Please," she whimpered. "It was just a mistake. I'm not a bad person." My father watched her go, his expression unreadable. He hadn't said a word since confirming his identity to the MPs. He simply stood there, a pillar of calm in the aftermath of the storm she had created. The coffee shop was quiet again. Lance Corporal Evans finally relaxed from his position of attention. The manager started nervously wiping the counter. Everything seemed to be settling down. I walked over to my dad. "Are you okay?" I asked, putting a hand on his shoulder. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not anger, but a profound sadness. He looked at the hat on the counter, then back at me. "I spent 40 years of my life," he said, his voice low and heavy, "defending her right to do that, to protest, to speak her mind, no matter how much I disagreed with it. I defended her right to be wrong." Ice. He picked up the red hat, holding it by the brim and looking at the disgusting smear on it. He didn't seem to see the woman, the police, or the coffee shop anymore. He seemed to be looking at something far away, at a lifetime of service and sacrifice. "But this," he said, his voice trailing off as he shook his head slowly. "This isn't protest. This isn't disagreement." He paused, his blue eyes finally locking onto mine, and what I saw in them sent a chill down my spine. "This is the beginning of the end." His words hung in the air, heavy and prophetic. The beginning of the end. It was more chilling than any of the woman's shrieking. It wasn't a threat, it was a diagnosis. He was a man who had studied the anatomy of conflict his entire adult life, from tribal skirmishes to full-scale wars, and he was seeing a symptom he recognized, the symptom of a society turning on itself, where dialogue was replaced by dehumanization. Captain Hayes of the MPs approached us, his stern demeanor softening slightly. "General, are you all right? Do you require any medical attention?" It was a formality, but a respectful one. My dad gave a small, weary smile. "I'm fine, Captain. Just a little disappointed." He gestured with the sullied hat. "I'm more concerned about the damage to public discourse than to my haberdashery." The captain nodded, understanding the sentiment. "Sir, we'll take your full statement down at the precinct. We can send a car for you and your son." My father shook his head. "That won't be necessary. We'll drive ourselves. Give us about 30 minutes. He wanted to decompress, to leave the scene of the battle and return to being a civilian, a father. The captain understood, gave a crisp nod, and left with his sergeant, leaving us with the quiet aftermath. The coffee shop was slowly coming back to life. People were starting to whisper amongst themselves, glancing our way with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. The manager came over, wringing his hands. "Sir, General, your coffee is on the house. Everything. For life." My dad clapped him on the shoulder. "Just 1 cup is fine, son. Thank you." He turned to Lance Corporal Evans, who was still standing nearby, looking like a sentinel guarding a holy site. "Corporal, it was good to see you. Thank you for standing your post." Evans swelled with pride. "It was my honor, sir. An absolute honor." "What are you studying?" my dad asked, his tone shifting from commander to mentor. "Engineering, sir. Trying to figure out how to build things instead of break them for a change." My dad smiled. A genuine warm smile this time. "Good man. The world needs more builders." He reached into his wallet, pulled out a business card, and handed it to the young Marine. "When you're ready to enter the job market, you give me a call. I know a few people who appreciate men with your character." Evans took the card like it was a medal, his eyes wide. "Sir, thank you, sir." We left the coffee shop and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. The police cars were gone, the drama over. It felt like emerging from a strange, intense dream. We walked to our car in silence. My dad tossed the red hat onto the back seat like it was a piece of contaminated evidence. As he started the engine, I finally asked the question that had been burning in my mind. "Are you really going to press charges?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out the windshield at the people walking by on the sidewalk, people of all colors, styles, and walks of life, all coexisting on the same piece of concrete. "What that woman did was wrong," he said finally. "It was ignorant, hateful, and profoundly disrespectful, not just to me, but to the very idea of a civil society." He paused, turning into traffic. "But she's not my enemy. She's my countryman. She's been poisoned by a diet of outrage and division, just like so many others. They've been taught that the other side isn't just wrong, they're evil, that compromise is weakness, and compassion is for suckers." "So you're not going to?" I asked, confused. "I am going to give a full, truthful statement to the police," he said. "I'm going to tell them exactly what happened. What the district attorney decides to do with that information is his decision. Justice needs to run its course." And that's what he did. We went to the precinct, and he gave a calm, factual account of the events. He didn't embellish or editorialize. He simply stated what had happened. A few days later, we learned that the DA's office had charged the woman with misdemeanor assault and battery. She pleaded guilty, likely to avoid a public trial where a 4-star general would be the star witness. She was sentenced to a fine, mandatory anger management classes, and 100 hours of community service, specifically community service at the local Veterans Affairs Hospital. My dad thought that was a fitting sentence. Maybe she'll meet the people she thinks she's fighting against, he said. Maybe she'll see they're not monsters, they're just people. Life returned to normal. My dad went back to his retirement, his yard work, and his plans to build a workshop. He never wore the red hat again. Not out of fear, but I think because it had been tainted. It was no longer just a hat. It was a symbol of that ugly afternoon. About a month later, a letter arrived. It was addressed to General David Miller. The handwriting was neat and careful. It was from the woman. She had tracked down our address through a friend of a friend. I watched my dad read it, his expression unreadable as always. When he was finished, he didn't crumple it up or throw it away. He just folded it carefully and handed it to me. It wasn't a litany of excuses. It wasn't a self-pitying plea for forgiveness. It was a simple, profound apology. She wrote about her first day volunteering at the VA, about talking to a young man who had lost both his legs in Afghanistan. She wrote about how he didn't talk about politics or hate, but about his kids and how he hoped to be able to play catch with them again one day. She wrote that for the first time, she saw the person, not the other side. The last line of the letter read, "I was wrong. I let hate make me into a hateful person, and I am deeply, truly sorry for my actions and the disrespect I showed you. Thank you for not hating me back." My dad took the letter from me and put it on his desk. He never mentioned it again. But I think, in a way, that letter was the real victory. It wasn't about winning a fight in a coffee shop or putting someone in their place. It was about one person, on one side of a vast, angry chasm, finally looking across and seeing the humanity on the other side. It wasn't the end of the war, but for my dad, the old general who had seen too much conflict, maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of peace.